Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Before I start, I'd like to thank everyone who is involved in developing this new program that we're launching at the AA, and especially Mike Gayling, our head of teaching, and Ingrid Schroeder, our director. I am James Kwang-Ho Chung, and I'm delighted to introduce a new program launching at the AA Transfer. At the event tonight, Architecture in Transition, organized by myself and Ben Foulkes. I'll give a very brief introduction of the program first, and then Ben will introduce our amazing speakers who joined today, Conrad, Nicola, and James, and Rory, who are so open and generous, and to share their experience in the views on transition. To briefly introduce the new program itself, AA Transfer is the world's first one-year graduate access program in architecture. It is designed for graduates from non-architecture disciplines who have come to feel a strong pull towards architecture later in their studies or career. The program offers a new pathway into the AA school and professional registration without having to take a bachelor's degree in architecture. It is designed to support graduates from non-architecture background to move directly into the AA diploma program or other postgraduate pathway at the AA. And some may ask why we are doing this now, and I'll start the presentation slide. So architectural education is changing. The traditional model of 3 years of undergraduate study before progressing to master's degree is being rethought by the Architecture Registration Board. We took this opportunity and tried something new to invite people with strong intellectual and creative backgrounds who find current routes into architecture inaccessible. The AA Transfer is our response. It creates a structured transition into architecture for people who have already developed ways of thinking, researching, or making in other fields, and want to bring that knowledge into a dialogue of architecture. The program prepares students to confidently progress into the AA diploma program after 1 year of intensive study. The program is built around lateral knowledge transfer, offering both a rigorous foundation and a space for individual interpretation informed by students' prior experience. AA Transfer is framed around the idea of architecture in transition. We invite students to reflect on their personal and disciplinary shift into architecture and how design can respond to cultural and environmental change. And this change, of course, is a much broader socio-cultural transition and condition that reshapes our practice and how we operate today. And we'll explore these with our speakers today, who have already gone through these relatable transitions from different disciplines and have received architecture education at the AA. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. And many people started to inquire about the details and the structure and the curriculum of the program. More information will be available on our program website, but I can also briefly go through tonight. In the first term, students work through short micro-projects that build on each student's background and encourage experimentation with drawing, modeling, and material studies. Many of these will be grounded in key architectural precedents. And in term 2 and 3, focus on the pilot building projects, which brings together all prior learnings into the design of a building as a shared medium. Students develop their own briefs by reimagining existing contexts and conditions, addressing site, program, spatial strategies, material choices, and details. Each brief addresses specific skills, modes of representation, and theoretical frameworks supported by the tutors and the specialists that we invite into the program. And towards the end of the program, students develop a unique individual piece in collaboration with the AA community, and working with alumni, peers, other programs, and externals to manifest their future trajectory while showcasing their individual strengths. And we, of course, recognize that some students may have no work experience in architecture. Therefore, we will have regular visits and lectures from leading practices in the UK and abroad to learn directly from how they operate. And thank you very much to of Architecture and James for sharing this beautiful image, their work in progress on their construction site where their projects are. So just to wrap up, the program will be intense, but the aim is not to compress 3 years of undergraduate studies into 1 year. Rather, it is to reorient students' prior knowledge so that they are prepared to thrive in the AA diploma program and other postgraduate programs at the AA after this intense year of study. Recently, Ingrid Schroeder, our director, published an article in the AJ expressing concerns about the increasing economization and acceleration in architectural education. And these are the concerns that I also deeply share, especially when innovation and sensitivity are at stake. So for me, the core value of this program lies in its cultural richness. I remember the incredible discussions that I had with, alongside my peers who are from different backgrounds, and they brought this wealth of knowledge and experiences that could only come from outside of this place. And in recent years, we've lost many of these mature thinkers, and it is invaluable to reintroduce these perspectives. So that is what this program is really about, creating new forms of dialogues, experimentation, and architectural thinking. We hope this will open architecture to those who might otherwise have thought it was closed off to them. And in doing so, make the AA even more diverse and inspiring space. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, James, for that introduction. Before I introduce everyone, kind of a few words about tonight's event. And I think, in the spirit of opening up the dialogue, it's very exciting to have such an amazing group of people here, the speakers who have all this sort of diverse backgrounds. And I hope that this cross-disciplinary discussion that happens tonight kind of inspires us maybe this new way of thinking about architectural education and practice in general, in the context of the new grad cert program. So to introduce everyone, our first speaker, Nicola, is an architect, educator, and founder of NVBL Architects, a practice which is dedicated to the design, research, and construction of environmentally conscious spaces and objects. She's a recipient of the Royal Academy of Arts Residency and was named as an RIBA Rising Star, and was recently featured alongside another member of the panel, James, for the Architecture Foundation's New Architects profile. And so Nicola's work has been exhibited widely at the RA and the Venice Biennale and more. And she has taught at UAL, Oxford Brookes, Kingston, and currently teaches Intermediate 15 at the AA. And so prior to her architectural education at the Bartlett, UCL, and AA, she read a joint honours BA in Fine Art and Architectural History. And so our next speaker, Conrad, is that next to me, is an architect and director of CKA, which is a design-led practice founded on principles of material responsibility, craftsmanship, and sustainability. And he's currently a lead tutor on the Masters of Architecture course at Cambridge, and has likewise been named as a RIBA Rising Star, and alongside winning the prestigious Stephen Lawrence Prize. And so prior to studying at the AA for intermediate and diploma, Conrad completed a BA majoring in history and psychology with a minor in fine art. And then so James is an architect and co-founder of Studio Off, which he established after a long-term experience at DRMM, Sterling Prize winners. He's experienced in a variety of education, residential, and master planning projects in the office, with a focus on kind of engineered timber construction. And in 2009, he founded a charity that designs, builds, and runs village schools in Cambodia, and he's been a kind of active volunteer ever since. James grew up in Hong Kong and graduated from the London School of Economics studying geography before completing his diploma at the AA. And then finally, Rory, at the end here, is an architect and educator as well, with previous experience working at OMMX, where for several years he worked on the design of a new affordable housing model for a non-profit developer. He has previously taught at the Royal College of Art and the University of Cambridge, and now teaches a fourth-year design studio at the Bartlett for the integrated MSci program, and runs Intermediate 10 at the AA. and he's also the deputy editor of AA Files and works independently on research and design projects with Francesca Romana Diallo. And before completing his architecture education at the AA, he studied philosophy. That's right. And those are our speakers, so I can hand over to Nicola, who's going first, I believe. Thank you.
So this was quite a journey, actually, going through like the process of just figuring out my relationship with my studies in fine art and coming into architecture. Because for me, architectural practice is inherently collaborative and cross-disciplinary. It touches on so many fields, but you also learn from all these other fields such as anthropology, history, psychology, art, geology, dance, philosophy. But of course, because architecture sits between all of these and touches on all of them, so we continuously look at and work with other disciplines to understand what architecture and space are and how it can be challenged in teaching and practice. And so I think the question really arises of how can we cross these disciplines, enjoy the discovery, I think, of the journey that we're on, but also how can we remain relevant and potentially even indispensable in this discipline, profession, yet also importantly fulfilled. So I'm going to discuss tonight, no, I'm not. I'm going to talk about something else. But I did come from fine art and history of art, but also with a section in architecture. And I came into architecture at the Bartlett, and then I came to the AA and diploma. But at school, when I was 16, I basically went on a trip to see a contemporary art exhibition in France, in Avignon. And it was exhibiting to Citadine and Escapo, amongst others. And it was so dark and surreal, and it just took me somewhere else, basically. So art allowed me to sit in multiple worlds, and I could see the possibilities and power that it had on me, but also on others, to explore new ways of thinking, new ways of being, but also I just knew at that point that I wanted to be an artist, basically. It opens up new ways of seeing the world, of feeling the world, but also sitting in a world that maybe can alter the way of experiencing that space, opening up new possibilities. It confronts you, it stays with you, it brings you into different places, but also reveals something new. And so architecture for me is really an art form. So I'm going to take you through a project that we just completed in the office in the south of France. It's called Beneath the Waves. But first I'll start, this is the plan, but first I'll start with going back to my fine art studies. So I studied fine art, and here you see me in the studio. It's probably the only image I actually have of this time, because I have pretty much no records at all of what I did, which is quite sad. But anyway, I combined it with also a joint honours in history of art and architecture, and because I was told that that was wise. And actually, Chris Pierce was my tutor in history of architecture, studying modernism, and we went to Paris. The courses were very much separate in their curriculum and approach, but I actually enjoyed the contrast, that one was very academic and the other one was really free. So studying fine art in the UK in the legacy of the YBAs, so of the 90s, it was sort of interesting but also quite odd. It was as if there was a disintegration of what art was, and for nowhere for it to really go. So it was very often about the intention, the idea, the representation. Itself was very informal, minimal, and often not really there. So we had to really push the limits of what art could be. And when it became art no more, it was also sort of like an era of the image of the artist and not really the object itself. So very much like the idea of the ready-made, so pushing what Duchamp had already done. So it became quite pointless somehow, quite extreme, to only really be seen in a way to look back at art history was the only way forward somehow. So the fine in fine art wasn't really there, it had gone, and the search for the non-representational returned. This idea of abstraction, of the intense reality and doom seemed quite necessary. So the question of aesthetics and beauty alongside authenticity became really important again. And so I inspired myself from different thinkers and makers, referencing history and time in many different forms and mediums. And so here, this was an artist that really inspired me at the time, Michael Wachowicz. But also looking at sort of other artists such as Fishley and Weiss. So fine art in the UK is really quite self-driven as a subject. You have to seek your own tutorials and expertise from a range of tutors, but because of that freedom and all the university departments that surrounded us, They were just at our doorstep. So basically, it meant that my work was with other departments where I produced a variety of different mediums and forms, but also working with geography, engineering, agriculture, and psychology departments, as well as collaborating with local galleries on curating exhibitions and installations, and local community centre-led projects. I was also taught by Ian Keir, who runs the head of school in Oxford, following 4 years of fine art and very much philosophizing alone with my cohort, losing myself and refinding myself continuously. Nothing was ever quite fixed, so yet continuously shifting and shaping into different versions of myself. And there was a lot of self-reflection during that time. But there was also a freedom of resilience and self-sufficiency, which was hard to endure, but also incredibly enriching. So that freedom is quite scary, but yet I crave the knowledge of a good craftsman, to gain tools to grow, to build without ever thinking I was going to do architecture itself conventionally, but I wanted to sort of continue my own art practice. And so I went to the Bartlett, which was an interesting place. And when studying there, I sort of felt like that freedom itself was lost. So in the structure, in the torch approach, in the rigor, that I had been searching for basically ever since. But yet architecture has given me the comfort, the stability I needed to grow, a framework to have a language, a voice, but also it taught me to design really well. And this is my second year section, which I think my tutors were quite confused about. So then I came to the AA and in diploma, and the situationists really spoke to me. I was in Dip 10, and this idea of how intangible space, the unseen, yet the felt, the unexpected moments that contribute to the cities in which we live. Because the AA is really an incredible place in training, diverse strategic and analytical thinking, and very much outside the box, if there's even a box itself. So focusing on a very broad and explorative understanding of what architecture is, encouraging independent thinking, individuality, collaboration, and observation. So we're going to go to the project Beneath the Waves. So when I was asked basically to do a project following already a project completed in London by the same clients. They wanted to have a holiday home in the south of France, Allée des Lucioles, and that's basically fireflies. So this idea of something kind of fleeting. But it was to adapt and refurbish a 1970s third floor flat in the south of France, and this is the concrete block. A very typical apartment block, opening up on the front and the back. It was very much kind of covered in its views, and it needed a lot of renovation. But I was aware, however, of when I went to site of these kind of senses of horizons. So this kind of flickering of light between sides, but also the kind of the deep views that you got, which reminded me of the work of Richard Woodcock in the southern England. And the first time I went there, I went swimming. So the water is so intense and it's dark green, which surrounds you when beneath the waves itself. So this was a really powerful experience for me, and I could see how it might feel really architectural. And so it suddenly took me back straight away to Rothko. So this made me think of how he focuses on color rather than line, to breathe light and imagination in the painting rather than technical skill. And these forms become like living organisms themselves. They're alive. So how these large-scale paintings themselves, you could actually come inside them somehow, designing this kind of felt experience. And so that seemed really important to me, to how to bring that into an architecture. And so opening up the layout itself, views across the rooms, bringing the sea inside, minimizing with minimal interruptions on the existing services, but also creating these thresholds between the larger spaces and the more private series of rooms were all like starting points for the project. So there were various testing of models, and here we see a few, referencing the work of very much Imi Noble, Room 19, and thinking about how these 77 pieces of these incredible craftsmanship and blurring distinctions between 2 and 3D dimensions started to become really exciting. So there was a rawness to the scale of the material, which is shown as a skin and as a veneer. But I also liked the kind of the scale that you could see where we were and what impact it had on you in terms of the material. So there's this ambiguity, as with Donald Judd, which I started to question in my own work. So how does this Holden sort of a relationship between sculpture, object, and architecture. And so that's something I wanted to explore more. To finally discover, actually, from all these models, 2 volumes cutting through the space, which will reflect and contain. And looking at that in plan. And referencing James Turrell's work, of course, drawings and clarity of form. So the fearlessness of the fall when you're young, that risk that you have, and the playfulness can often be, I think, concealed somehow when you go into an architectural education. So seeking a sense of perfection, of clarity, of rigor. Every line has great meaning when we're an architect, and there's a great responsibility with that. So there's an importance, I think, to retain ambiguity without narrative. And so we experience things through the senses and the body, but much more than the rationale. And so how can we actually seek a middle ground between the looseness of art and the rigor of architecture? So, and at the moment, the oddities, I think, become more interesting to me rather than the perfections. So we explored these natural qualities of the landscape through 2 stained lacquered joinery pieces, volumes that were tested in 1 to 20 models. And also one-to-one, numerous attempts at one-to-one samples on site. And looking how that comes together in plan to contain all the services and have the bathroom and kitchen within and the storage. So opening up as well that plan. So here we start to work on site, bringing all the joinery that's made off-site very quickly in. This took about a year or something to make, before then it comes into the space. And these are some images. Open, closed kitchen, some of the detailing. So what was really important was also the sense of reuse. So nothing went to waste, and these are the tiles that were on the floor that we basically took up, cleaned, and then used for the bathroom. So the whole building, really, for us, was this idea of a painting. So how can we actually abstract the image? How can we extend the image of the horizon and bring in a completely different relationship to that space? And so when you're in bed, you don't quite see yourself in the same way. So actually, yeah, so I think that whole project was about how to kind of find a new way of seeing a volume, of seeing a sculpture within a space, and how to experience it every single moment of the day completely differently. And so here, I'm just going to go through a series of really quick images of how we've done that in practice in many different ways, basically trying to test what civic space is, very quickly, how to think about sort of materials and corners coming into each other, how to think about 3 columns of stone, how that might hold and support a photographic studio, as we did last year with Projects Review or the Strawberry Table, and then testing that very quickly as well. So architecture doesn't have necessarily the same time zone, and I think that what I've discovered is my art degree, but also my history of art degree, has really taught me sort of like the skills to be able to analyze, observe, take the time, work in a slow way, and have that freedom within architecture that might sometimes feel quite contained and quite at speed. So these are the Royal Academy of Arts models and the exhibition that starts to, I think, somehow work in all of these ways. Thank you.
So I'm at a strange place in my practice where most of my projects are at sort of 95%, and I've been stuck there for years now. And so I'm going to flick through, as an indulgence, as many projects as I can that haven't been shown to anyone ever, so that I can get that off my chest while I talk about other things. And then I'll get into one particular project, which is a children's home that I did for a charity. So, basically, I'm not sure how successfully I'll manage to make a claim for threads in my work, because I'm in a phase where my head is really down, trying to get projects over the line, and also because I'm very close to the work itself. I'm also not entirely sure I've found the freedom in the work I do to express the roots of my interests, due to time constraints, clients, budgets, the usual things that architects often have to deal with. But I also think for any of us, it's unclear how much of our worldview and approach was already germinating before formal education, where we have the time and space to explore pre-existing interests. And I think these stick with you before and during and after education. So if you're pivoting into architecture, I'd suggest, from my personal perspective, thinking of it less as a direct transfer and hybridization of a particular educational experience, and more as informing an attitude and approach within a new discipline. So yeah, to provide some context, I've been digging into my past a bit to see if and how my experiences and training filter through into practice. So this will be very cursory and hopefully not bordering on superficial, but it'll be quick. This is little me. I was in a really fun band for many years, playing shows every weekend. The creation and performance of music can be fantastically free, and it's a reminder that while there's necessarily there is necessarily rigidity, rationalization, and order in architecture, there's also much that's impulsive, intuited, or felt, and that can't and maybe shouldn't be explained. That's sometimes forgotten in certain kind of discourses in architecture. Coming from what I would call an aesthetically impoverished background, photography was my first creative visual medium. It opened a whole universe for me and was a powerful tool to make sense of a world I'd really been sheltered from, which is another story I kept out. Photography taught me precision, iteration, and curation. It taught me composition, an appreciation of light, form, and so forth. I don't design now through image per se, but it feeds into a sort of collage approach that's embedded in my practice, which is a way of collecting, framing, analyzing kind of photographic things in a way, in and of themselves, recontextualizing, and that could be described altogether as a kind of sampling. I was raised in and sorry I didn't show any photos, you're not allowed to see those. I was raised in a Canadian suburb in Winnipeg, cut off from a downtown that had been economically and socially gutted by sprawl. My first experience of construction was working as an unskilled laborer for excavation companies, digging holes for basements in what used to be grasslands to extend what I can only describe as hellscapes. Later, I built formwork for foundations before trying my hand at fixing up a derelict and really run-down home in downtown, stripping large parts of it to its frame and rebuilding it, albeit in hindsight quite badly. I know better now. My bed was a pile of plasterboard for some months, and I later ran a small construction company, which feeds in obviously to what I do now. The suburban experience gave me a sort of profound aversion for architecture as objects in a field, detached from their context and singular in their conception. And it contributes to the kind of groundedness within time and context that I push for in my work and with students. Obviously I think the construction is a bit more of a literal translation. The point of raising those things, there are other things to feed in, such as, my experiences with a certain kind of nature, landscape, travels, ethical concerns. I mean, we all bring so many things to our coursework, to our studies, and then later to our discipline, to our practice. So I want to put the academic experience within the context of those things. So now I'm going to launch into describing this project, which was a children's home for a charity. The systemic inadequacies of children's social care in the UK are well documented. Care leavers tend to have poor educational outcomes. They're 50 times more likely to end up in prison. And a third of care leavers are homeless within 2 years of leaving care. Many children's homes are private entities that tend to prioritize bureaucratic regulatory adherence or profit over the needs of vulnerable children. So I was asked to help the inspiring Emmanuel Akpen Inweng at Lighthouse search for a suitable property for their first children's home, with the aim of designing and delivering a new benchmark for the sector. So among the properties that we visited was a derelict former care home. There's a bit of a theme with derelict buildings, abandoned due to the tragic neglect and abuse of its residents and destined for the wrecking ball. So with an attitude analogous to the purpose and ethos of the charity, we saw enormous potential despite the mold and rot for this unloved and neglected building. We developed a kind of child-centered brief through several meetings and workshops with the client to address the physical, social, and psychological space shared by the children and those who work and live with them. And the project evolved through a series of kind of design fragments, moments within the house. These moments in turn fall within 4 categories, illustrated and annotated in this diagram. It's going to be very small for you to see, but I'll talk you through it a little bit. So first and foremost, the house had to feel like a home and not an institution. So this is what many children's homes look like. Without resource knowledge or patience, the unique and complex requirements of children's homes are often dealt with in an ad hoc fashion. And for context, this chair in the middle image is where overnight staff are expected to sit all night if, for example, a child is prone to self-harm. How am I doing on time? Am I still good for time? Okay. I still have a lot to get through. Okay, so in some cases, in worse cases, these homes succumb to a kind of carceral impulse, where, in this example, a kind of panopticon-esque office is intended as a tool for surveillance, but was thankfully covered over by some insightful staff. And I've seen many. I am tendering for many public projects now, and I see examples of feasibility studies where airlocks are introduced into these homes. So by contrast, we wanted the home to be warm and inviting, and really stubbornly challenged and rethought every regulatory detail, from the escape stairs through to integrated fire equipment and signage. I know it still looks like a cage, but believe me, it's quite a lot better than most of the homes that are out there. So we tried to meet these requirements without being too overbearing. The physical home is often an outlet for children in care as a proxy for their understandable angers and fears, and we were determined that the materiality of the home should withstand abuse without looking institutional, and while also being tactile, warm, and playful. So the ambition is also to break the cycle of disposable laminate plastic replacements that's common in care homes, and that the materials used should instead, ideally, improve with use and age or be easily repairable. We didn't get everything right, believe me. I still work very closely with the home and on their kind of maintenance regime, which is also quite fascinating. But that sounds really dull, but it's actually very interesting. So for example, this tactile lime plaster is far tougher than gypsum. Solid oak is used throughout. Doors are designed to withstand kicks and charges. The new floors have thick solid wearing layers. And similar criteria were used for selecting fittings and furnishings throughout, including for a dining table we designed for the home, which is kind of just slightly on screen. Other details, going back to this diagram, encourage learning, play, and participation in the home. And we tried to invoke curiosity through interactive surfaces like movable dividers and chalkboards, and through materials like fossil-rich limestone. And we introduced color throughout the home, trying also not to be too infantilizing without knowing exactly what age the children would be. A third group of details falls under the heading of negotiation, relations, and renewal, whereby we strove to provide adaptable and diverse spaces to facilitate the complex and unpredictable relationships of the home. So deep thresholds, liminal spaces help to establish layers of privacy, while several niches near communal areas create semi-social refuges with carefully choreographed vantages across the home. Each shared living space had 2 routes out to counter a sense of entrapment, for children that are otherwise accustomed to abuse and bullying. And bedrooms are designed with several furniture layouts in mind to facilitate a sense of urgency and choice, agency, sorry. So finally, where an office door, for example, is typically a symbol of authority in these homes, it's a predictable flashpoint. We provided a soft and welcoming counterpoint to help diffuse tensions. So I should also mention that the home is currently being used for the first university course to teach social pedagogues to train them to become staff in these homes. And they use a VR headset in the home to describe the kind of life and experience of working in a children's home. So it has really become a project that is influencing the way these homes are built. And I also weirdly saw a briefing document the other day for a tender where I was trying to tender to win the work, and my project was referenced. This project was referenced as an exemplary model. So, I mean, I probably still won't get the work for reasons that we might get into. But anyway, so I'll skip through all of this. This is another home that we're just breaking ground on with the same client, introducing many of the principles, but learning from those and improving on those. So anyway, I will now very quickly try to talk about my, and the reason that I've been invited here, to talk about my liberal arts background, which is through, as was discussed earlier, liberal arts and history and psychology double major. I often forget the fine arts minor. It's a North American system. It's quite different to here. But anyhow, it's a time I really wouldn't trade for the world. It was my way to get above the parapet of my own experience, my own experiences. Psychology in particular, I think we can see from the previous project, there are some threads that carry through, but it's really difficult to know how direct those threads are, or if they're tangential. Yeah, regardless, it gave me tools to understand how people perceive, think, and act in different environments. It's not really possible for me to separate this education from other experiences, but it's safe to say that it at least informs a design intuition to create spaces that function well socially, experientially, and behaviorally. And I probably have a bit more of a sensitivity as a result to the dynamics at play in a children's home, though this is probably also informed by the fact that I worked in care settings with children and adults with developmental disabilities while I was studying. So then, more generally, and sorry, I'm not illustrating these points with images, but more generally, I'd say that studying history informs a more obvious ethos relating to the act of building as something rooted in time, as something that's impermanent and shifting. So zooming out, one realizes that we contribute to just one stage of a building's life. So I'm reminded of Frank Duffy and Stuart Brand, who speak of buildings in shearing layers that relate to time. So a masonry wall might have one longer time span, while electrical circuits might have a relatively short time span. And of course, one thinks of the history of a material in biological, chemical, geological terms. Architects are part of a larger metabolism of buildings and cities and landscapes over time. And I guess probably my history degree fed into that understanding. So for the Lighthouse project in particular, the direct engagement with the building, the strong feeling to retaining links with the old and aged, not to preserve per se, but to collaborate with past actors, and so forth. All of this comes from a kind of affinity for history. So just finally, I'll wrap up. This is all pre-AA, and that's more than 20 years ago. And so, this talk is about transfer, so I haven't even touched on my time in this fantastic institution, where I had the time, the space, brilliant tutoring to learn visual communication, who I am as a designer, and to develop a design ethos that was informed by all those values that I had carried with me onto the course. So this ongoing evolution of ever hybridizing influences is both edifying and ideally of some use to society in one way or another. So that's, yeah. Hopefully not too long.
Hi, my name is James, and I am one of the co-founders of architecture. I suppose before I start, I'd like to sort of say a few things about my background in geography before I came to the AA. And this particular group of slides isn't particularly, speaking of the direct influences of geography, but perhaps through the work itself, I think it becomes quite apparent, and perhaps the way that we practice now has quite an interesting linkage. So I'll probably dive into it. So NA and my partner and I founded the office in 2022, so quite recently. We went to the AA together since our first year, and after graduating, he worked for 6A and myself for DRMM. And now we're a very small team of 5, and we have a little small office in Hackney in East London, as well as a satellite office in South Korea. So one might call that we are quite an itinerant architect that travels from place to place. Hence the sort of, the adaptability of one being an architect and practicing in more than one place. I guess I owe this sort of event to not talk about this if I don't speak of it. I suppose our interest in architecture, if there is one, is its full capacity. And for the purposes of this particular event, I would say the act of making buildings. We acknowledge the sort of vastly distinctive context that we work in, and really try to celebrate the kind of circumstantial qualities of it. And here is probably the more visceral example of it, where we're marking up a drawing in its most sort of physical sense, fragments of sketches that are on site to describe the act of repair and perform that, where we can expose the building where we want to. But if I kind of want to step back a little bit and talk about our current interest in the studio, it's really 2 main things. Number one is that we want to pursue architecture as an open and social potential in order to be generative rather than prescriptive. Number 2 is the possibility for life that arise as a result of a universal type combined with specific context. So if I can be quite direct about it, is that how I can use a type in a specific context to become generative, right? And I'll try to sort of explain that in 2 snippets of a project here. One is one of the first projects in Cornwall. It's a house that we did for a filmmaker. He really wanted us to do a house that is upscale and spatial quality that could really afford a range of activities. He would invite his entire filming crew, edit, think of films. We are required to make an architecture that's robust, one that is light, almost sort of allude to a automotive garage-like space. In the sense that the sort of utilitarian and universal type of a garage then becomes, transfigured into a creative use as well as a domestic use. The second project that is of a slightly different scale that we're working on at the minute, we're hoping to finish at the end of the year, is Yunsu Youth Center. We are in a context that is quite fickle. It's a new town. We wouldn't know, what is the impending urban development that is surrounding us. So for us to create a youth center, we thought that, the challenge is how do we create a tangible space, one that young people can, feel that they belong, and one that they can actually accumulate. So by introducing a spine of sort of this learning and leisure program that is then absorbed by this sort of linear, we call it an oversized living room. Young people can then see and be seen, and mentally recalls the kind of centrality of an atrium. It is, in fact, quite a casual space, and metaphorically as well as quite literally is a room where you can take your shoes off. So if I can sort of exemplify the perhaps speak quite directly of the AA transfer program, and one I would, perhaps, in this accelerated way, I would like to present one of the more whole project that we did recently. It is an organic farm in Chung. Another competition. We designed it in a very short period of time, and I thought that perhaps the background in geography and perhaps understanding of context might have something to play here. So it's an incredibly sort of straightforward architectural project I'm about to show you. We did the competition last year. The site is a little midway town, which is a distant agricultural town. Because it is a public tender, so we were forced to think about it in the shoes of the council, the local council. And we felt that the council had kind of this genuine effort, right, to create a recreational destination, one that is enriched by this ecological park you can see on the right-hand side of the image. The site is situated just slightly north, in an adjacent farmland, so they haven't really touched upon that. What I felt at odds with is that this sort of fabricated landscape, this fabricated artificial, rows of trees along this boulevard, and you see little spirals and parcels of this ecological park. And not to be sort of cynical about it, and I completely understand why the council wanted to challenge architects, is that, after this 2-hour walk in an ecological park, you want to sit down, you want to see where's the cafe and where's the souvenir shop. In a sense, it becomes quite an interesting brief for us to think about the productive nature of the land, one that is about agriculture, that is already ingrained on site, and to marry it up with the kind of consumption side of it. So how do we then, use and have that food? So on site, we're immediately drawn by the grain of the land, which is an agricultural sort of this linear landscape, as well as its immediate context, which are these anonymous polytunnels. They are provisional, incredibly easy to build. They are linear arrangements where it really allowed machineries to kind of go through and grow things very, very productively. As international architects, it is not, I would be lying if I tell you that I thought about it when I was on site. No, I thought about it when I was in Bermondsey. And I think the interesting thing about it is that one can see these types really everywhere we are. And what is quite fascinating is that we see these types of spaces used and reused and create a world of its own, and the architecture being just a backdrop. Yes, on the left, it's the arches that we are familiar with in London. On the right is actually, in fact, a local market. This is one of these quintessential local markets that you'll see every day in Korea, stitching two parts of the city linearly as you kind of walk through a local market. And there on top, this sort of barrel vault and translucent arch. So once we identified a system, the building, what we call it, the building design itself, we wanted a farm sort of being and celebrated to be a very important aspect of the project, and therefore the open horseshoe. We put the kind of surface spine at the back of the house towards the periphery of the building, and shared facilities in the center. And then we assign them into functions. And we thought that what's powerful to this type is that it is an incredibly flexible, unitized thing that we can then assign functions to the way that we choose to design this. The main approach of the building is from the bottom right corner of this page. And so we have the front of the building having the shops, seat library, to the right, the restaurants where you're greeted, and to the rear end, the processing plants and the education bit. All of which I think had an interesting sort of relationship with that farm that we created in the center. And in a way, by identifying this kind of universal type of barrel vaults, it opened up in the possibilities of which that these rooms are then circulated. In a way, they're very good circulation spaces because we don't have to create corridors for them. They're incredibly sort of flexible in that sense that one can occupy them without really sort of disrupt the entire spatial flow. What I thought was also interesting to show in sort of the very initial idea images is that in Korean competitions, we're not allowed to use any post-production softwares. So no Photoshop. This is as we've seen it on your softwares. And I thought that kind of accelerated time frame was quite interesting, and that in someone that might be interested in making architecture. In a way, they were quite successful because they are quite diagrammatic. One kind of exchange for us, that frame of architecture, that your foreground becomes, on the left is a seed library, in the center an experimental kitchen, on the right is a shop. And if you're not in the room, this sort of elongated spine become the spill out of the restaurant. And, the project I've said since then developed, and I'll just show you some images of how it become, where we kind of understand materiality, the quality of the light, and how we then bring warmth to otherwise quite an industrial building. And if one were to kind of traverse horizontally instead of going along these arches, they become that kind of layered spaces. This is also of the restaurant. And as you kind of travel through, we quite enjoyed the fact that the flexibility is quite ingrained into this type, where the valley of the arches become, quite flexible in use. So from the sort of initial development to now, we're hoping to perhaps work on it in the coming year or so and not go on site next year. And I think one of the things that we weren't able to show in our own images is the intensity of which that we work with the F&B or food and beverages, the consultants, because the menu and everything about this building is on the produce. And in a way, because of the robustness of the building, we thought we didn't want to create anything that isn't too vernacular. In that sense, it allowed something that's quite delicate to be able to inhabit them. And externally, we also worked with quite an intense sort of ecological program. This is a reference that we showed the mayor, I think, and Noma. So to kind of wrap up it, I try to be brief. The building, wanted to be sort of an anonymous structure, as very similar to what you see in the polytunnels. And I think if we are to sort of backtrack on types and the kind of transfiguration of them, we quite enjoyed the fact that we can borrow a type of a garage to call it a house, and the living room to do a youth center. And I think in this particular project, one can be reminded of, a terminal building as a farm. And I hope that gives you a taste of how quickly these projects can come together, as well as the kind of simplicity of them and directness of them, and perhaps borrowing ideas wherever we see them. So yeah, this is it. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Last, I hope, not least. Yeah, I'm Rory. I realized I didn't give a title to this, but that was a kind of placeholder. But if there is one, it maybe is about form and forms of practice. So, yeah, my name's Rory Sherlock, and I'm now an architect. But I would credit much of my career in the architectural discipline to initially having opted to study for a degree in philosophy after leaving school. Rather guiltily, I started that degree, but I never finished it. In fact, I barely got going, really. And instead, I made the decision to switch to architecture, finding a home at the AA, since it was really the only place that would have me. The first book that I was required to buy for the course was this slender volume, The Complete Works of Plato. And my entire first term of metaphysics seminars was dedicated to a close reading of Meno. Now, Meno, to a certain extent, is a dialogue that can be architecturally framed as an urban parable concerning the value of divine virtue to the leadership and organization of the city, but that really is another reading for another time. I instead returned to it for the purposes of the presentation tonight, for its elucidation of the paradox of learning and the pedagogical solution that it offers to finding new knowledge through the application of critical inquiry. It starts with Meno asking Socrates whether virtue can be taught, a simple enough question, seemingly. But after some wrangling and finding agreement that neither Meno nor Socrates actually know what virtue is, Meno asks a question. He says, "How will you look for it, Socrates, when you do not know at all what it is? How will you aim to search for something you do not know at all? And if you should meet with it, how will you know that it is the thing that you did not know?" In other words, how can you find new knowledge without being taught or explicitly told what it is, since, not knowing it already, you are unequipped with the faculties to understand that you've arrived at it? Rereading it, I realized that this central pedagogical query neatly, perhaps too neatly, encompass much of my approach to the architectural discipline and contemporary models of both practice and education. And so, since I'm an architect after all, I designed and constructed this short presentation as a fairly weak in the sense that there's only 5 questions rather than about 200 in the Meno, simulacrum of the Socratic dialogue in a bid to advance a specific position. It is a small project in and of itself. While to some extent this is to avoid having to speak too much about myself and my work, something I'm not particularly comfortable doing, it is also because form is important and we shouldn't forget that. So to start with, a question, who are you? So to begin, perhaps it's helpful to have a little bit of context, to construct the lens through which I view architecture as both a subject and a framework for knowledge about the world, grounded in form and experience. As I said at the beginning, I am an architect, but where once that title represented a neatly or relatively singular and coherent whole, today it operates, for many people at least, as more of an umbrella. Personally speaking, there are 3 primary components that comprise the definition of myself as an architect. As a teacher, I currently work at the AA as a unit master for Intermediate 10 with Valentin Bunches van Beek. I also run a media studies course at the school as well, and I lead a 4th-year design studio on the MSci program at the Bartlett School of Architecture together with Francesca Dell'Alio. These are the house rules that we drafted for engagement with the work of the unit, which some of you might recognize from, they've been drafted after Sister Carita Kent's list of rules for the Immaculate Heart College Art Department. I also previously taught master's level history and theory courses at the Royal College of Art and both 2nd and 1st year design studios at the University of Cambridge. As an editor, I'm the deputy editor of AA Files, the AA's journal of record, and I write and edit in a freelance capacity for various other books and magazines. As a designer, I worked for several years in an office, OMMX, working on a new affordable housing paradigm, and I now undertake projects independently and collaboratively with Francesca Dell'Alio. At the moment, we're developing research into a small town called Riace in Calabria, in the south of Italy, which was, like many other rural Italian towns at the turn of the 21st century, facing desolation due to a severely declining population. This example of that type of town is interesting, though, since its mayor, Mimmo Lucano, a human rights activist, adopted an open immigration policy in a bid to revitalize the town. The consequences of this decision, for which Lucano was shot at, had his dogs poisoned, and ultimately was sentenced to 13 years in jail at the hand of the right-wing ruling coalition of Italy in 2018, are architecturally and socially fascinating. Spaces built according to a particular logic that reflected the dominant hierarchies and organizational structures of the old town are now being reinvented to accommodate new forms of living, new rituals, and new cultural practices that we're attempting to document. This might all sound rather busy, and in some ways it is, but I say it really not to hold up my weird mix of stuff as any kind of aspirational paragon. It's just one of multitudinous composite models that might in 2025 constitute the definition of an architect. And really, I want to reinforce that that is what I am and call myself. I don't class or refer to myself as an educator, a writer, or a theorist. I don't operate at any intersections. I am an architect, and I think it's important to claim that title. Why does it matter, though? You're still an architect, after all, and other definitions you might label yourself with aren't protected titles, so why not use them? Well, it matters because it underpins a broader argument about the changing role of the architect, the active redrawing of the structures of architectural education in the UK, and the definition of the architect in the context of a more widely changing world. As the regulatory, legal, and economic instruments that govern architectural production and the alteration of the built environment in general have grown in complexity, so too has spatial practice more generally evolved to reflect them. Many of you will be familiar with the huge numbers of surveyors, engineers, and consultants that might now comprise a design team in practice, sitting alongside and informing the architect in designing and building pretty much anything at all in 2025. These non-exhaustive lists not only acknowledge those who sit client-side, they only acknowledge those who sit client-side on any given project. They neglect to include the myriad personnel who are responsible for reviewing, approving, and maintaining these contracts, among many other roles besides. All of which is to say that it takes a village today to get anything done. In principle, this is a good thing, since it reflects the significant cost, ethical responsibility, and social impact of architectural intervention, by incorporating the necessary expertise to inform responsive, considered, and durable proposals. But it's also to say that the architect, in both their education and practice, must now wear many disciplinary hats at once, from that of the sociologist to that of the anthropologist and that of the lawyer, etc. It is essentially complicated. Sorry. What's the problem? Isn't it this exactly what you're advocating or perhaps responding to with your own model of practice? Well, yes, there is no problem with this in theory. The world, its organizational systems and cultures, and the spaces that engender them are growing more complex. So we too must move and evolve with the times. But certain concerns, I suppose, arise from the acknowledgement of this fact, and potentials too. Architecture remains at present a highly commercially volatile industry, and the forces that instrumentalize it as a form of service are typically uninterested in leveraging it to reflect progressive ideas about the planet and the ways we live, I say generally. This means that the architect as a figure is, for the most part, or often, used as a subject or a tool for the organization of resources. We work for clients, in summary. Rarely are we the independent drivers of positive change, and yet, not only does our disciplinary practice encompass knowledge about the histories and relational networks of civilization itself, but more precisely how that knowledge and theory can be grounded and reflected in built artifacts. So the key, then, a key thing to consider is not whether architects can affect large-scale and impactful change, or if we can operate in a condition defined by dispositions rather than binaries, but rather how we can do it. There is an inherent optimism in this position. Maybe it needs some explanation to tease it out. And the definition of the architect here also becomes very important. If you're educated as an architect, what do you become afterwards? Well, you become an architect. But for a very long time, and to a certain extent this is reflected in the ARB's changes to the way it regulates architectural education, the aspiration has been to funnel diverse skills and perspectives towards a singular model of practice. Now, we've seen this ring before. I think we're right to question whether that remains a relevant aim. What if, for the sake of argument, we thought of it less as a funnel and more as a pinch point? As a means not of gathering plural disciplinary knowledge and packaging it within the service-driven structure of the profession as is, but instead as a means of harnessing these plural bodies of knowledge in order to generate new systems of spatial practice altogether. Rather than maintaining a relatively narrow definition of the architect or cleaving to a competence-based framework for their assessment, what if we expanded our horizons and the scope of roles we might play along with them? In the context of that aim, do the ARB changes represent an opportunity or a threat? Well, to a certain extent at the moment, they currently represent both. But the opportunities that have been created are there to be seized, and this, I think, is really where the AA's transfer course is particularly interesting. Now, for my part, I'm slightly worried as an intermediate tutor because the new models of certification set out by the ARB will seemingly make BA-level architecture courses somewhat redundant, especially given the difficulties currently presented by the professional job market and stringent immigration policies affecting architectural practice in the UK. That said, I also teach on a 5-year integrated course elsewhere, so I'm safe. Nevertheless, herein lies the opportunity for a school like the AA, which has such a prominent role and has historically played such a prominent role and now has a legacy of shaping the architectural culture with its intermediate diploma and postgraduate programs. Instead of funneling students from a variety of disciplinary backgrounds into the backs of quite a difficult sort of situation, perhaps as it is, it has the capacity to work with them in defining entirely new models of professional practice. It can do this by fusing their experience with the plurality of approaches that are manifest in the plethora of units that currently comprise the master's level design course and beyond. This means that the new academic model constructed by the ARB, as it applies to the AA diploma, could result in the development of new forms of architectural practice that don't yet exist, and forging the conditions for their emergence too. On the other hand, the intermediate program, not so redundant, would then become slightly freer, if you like, to pursue a more varied and perhaps even esoteric curriculum, driven by a broad base of knowledge that feeds the village of people responsible for contemporary spatial practice. From this base of education and design, better planners, policymakers, politicians, and urban strategists might emerge. So how can you teach about forms of practice that don't yet exist? Well, here we are, back at the learner's paradox. The short answer to this, arrived at through my fairly derivative and brief line of questioning, is that it's a matter of pedagogical method, of how one defines a way of learning, seeing, and acting. Philosophy provides a framework for the acquisition, distribution, and creation of knowledge. It's a structure of learning within which an understanding of the world and one's place within it can be ordered and extended. Architecture today, I see, this is my opinion, as playing a similar role in its provision of a distinct framework for the collection, connection, and application of entwined bodies of knowledge through spatial practice. By acknowledging the potential of disciplinary inference to shape new models of how this might be done, I like to think of competence as the baseline, not the aspiration. To think of education as something more than a quick route towards something already known. And to think of myself, I hope, as an architect, not an architect and, or an architect or. In shaping the culture of the discipline through plurality. In the end, through the various strands of the work that I do at the moment, the critical framework for which was perhaps determined by my interest in philosophy, I hope to generate new knowledge, to not sit on the opposite side of the table from others, dispensing facts, but instead to sit on the same side, marching together towards new horizons, to forge new ideas and practices together through dialogue. So to return to the idea of dialogue, I'll end with a quote from Socrates at the conclusion of his with Meno, which is that some things of which I've said I'm not altogether confident, but we shall be better and braver and less helpless if we think that we ought to inquire than we should have been if we indulged in the idle fancy that there was no knowing and no use in seeking to know what we did not know. That is a theme upon which I am ready to fight in word and deed to the utmost of my power. Thank you.
Thank you very much for everyone's presentation. Yeah, it's quite amazing to hear, like, you know, and to a degree quite transparent and vulnerable to your background, and you know, sharing this, you know, how do you say, like direct, indirect influences, you know, from these accumulated experiences through the most recent work and thinking that's been presented today. So it's really great, and yeah, I mean, really loved how, you know, Nicola, for example, went through this almost like as if you know, the process of the painter actually crafting work, and that's how, you know, like a relatable the architectural practice is, a directly interchangeable process that it could be also. And for like Conrad, I think, like, you know, this kind of sensitivity, if it wasn't really for you to consider these, you know, this perception, you know, intuition and the social aspects that you're describing through the project. And that may also have been driven from your previous experience, I think. Yeah, it really kind of holds all these, knowledge and the experience together in the project. So it was really amazing. And, how James kind of presented this, non-plan ethos of the studio. And, this kind of natural acceptance of quite deliberate, acceptance of usages that's been kind of delegated into the users. And also like really interesting observation of like a migration of types that's not necessarily always situated in the context. And, as if these, multiple disciplines can be also somehow migrate into the practice or to be appropriated or adopted is really interesting. And, and I think like Rory is really opening up this kind of the questions that we actually shared in advance that I hope Ben can elaborate further. But it's, from the recent discussion at the AA through Chronogram, I think there were a lot of speakers actually talking about the transition of the shifting world, and also therefore the reflection on our profession and our role as an architect. So yeah, I think it will be really good to share the questions that we shared with the speakers and then get into the discussion, roundtable discussion.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It's amazing. And yeah, I think Rory, you really touched on this first question that we shared with you. But it'd be interesting to hear from the other three speakers how you feel. So we kind of understood how your backgrounds and your cross-disciplinary transition into architecture has begun to shape your practice. But really, how do you see architectural practice kind of transforming to meet the changes in a generation of graduates who might have this plurality, this cross-disciplinary approach? What are the real changes in practice, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure why, but I started thinking of other architects who maybe started their careers late. I mean, my colleague that I work with was mentioning Jeffrey Bow only began as an architect when he was 40 or so. Is it Mies that also started quite late? And there are, but then I also think of people like there was an Architecture Foundation screening and lecture about Francois Poulian, who took his experience during the war, working in quarries after having studied at the Beaux-Arts, to actually have a really intimate and radically hustling sort of method of construction that kind of found a means of producing a post-war architecture that was at the right place at the right time, very controversial in other ways. But anyway, I don't know if it's up to the actual graduates to transform the industry, or if the industry is... I'm not so sure that the industry is ready to accept. I think we have to claim that space. I think graduates will have to claim that space and find ways in which their diverse skills can be valued. Because there is an enormous amount of value. I think I was very happy to see this list of kind of bureaucratic requirements. And each one of those items is a little slice of territory from architecture that's been taken away. And I think for too long as a profession, we've allowed that to happen. And we haven't necessarily had people fighting our corner. But I do think that it's those sorts of things that we need to find a way of kind of reclaiming. Yeah, that's my initial thinking on that. Yeah.
If I may, hello. kind of been speaking about it in the studio as well, so I might share some thoughts. I shared perhaps some of the sentiment that Conrad's saying, is that perhaps it's the industry isn't ready for such a radical change, or if there's the kind of pluralism of a project that one might expect. But I would say this is that to be an architect in this at present perhaps has to be curious in everything that we see. Yes, there is a long list of consultants that will have to assist us on the way in realizing these buildings. But if one is embedded with that kind of empathetic thinking, and empathy is a huge word in architecture at the minute, I think we will see projects everywhere we go. And I think that is one crucial point I'd like to put forward. The second thing that I would say, though, however, is that there are conventions of architecture that you need to learn in school, and we must stand firm in those conventions. I think may it be the elements of architecture, may it be the planning process. The profession is perhaps, yes, eaten away and fragmented, but there are things that are quite central to what we do. So projects are everywhere, but there are things that are quite central, is what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I could just follow on the back of that. I do think that one of the reasons that we have forfeited so much scope is that we haven't actually been able to situate ourselves really at the core of building. I think that we will inevitably bring all of these other disciplines with us, and I think it is extremely important to do so. I'm in my own practice eagerly trying to claw back because of my, do we need a planning consultant if I can, if I'm able to write and I'm able to critique, I'm able to understand policy, these are skills that we have. And we undervalue those parts of ourselves, and we only value, let's say, the creativity, which is the thing that is valued the least in many parts of the industry. And so it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I often, when it comes to actual fees, I'll often inflate my fees for things that have a perception of value to subsidize the things that I value, which are, design quality, all the kind of sensitive thinking that goes into a project, all that kind of thing. And so I'm starting to do things like project manage and actually do some basic general contracting in the hopes of doing more, so that I can claim more of that, center ground and do more of what I went into architecture to do, which is all of that really rich, more nuanced stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say that there's a sense of agency that's needed. No, as architects, I mean, we do undersell ourselves, I think, most of the time. And so how can we not only regain space but regain value within, I guess, a discipline and a profession, which is often forgotten, I think. We're often only asked to do planning applications because that's all they need. And then, they'll go and get a contractor and will be entirely, dismissed from that point. So I think that, yes, in practice as well, we do go and get the projects. We seek them, we build them, we work very carefully with who we're going to collaborate with in order to maintain, I think, a sense of control. So it'd be really nice to sort of know when we can let go as well, in some ways. So how we can maintain, I think, a sense of quality whilst also kind of continuing the collaborations. And I think a lot of that is placing a very different approach to who we are as architects, essentially. And so becoming agents within our own work. which is often undermined.
I can give some more on this, yeah, but I think agency is a really important word in this context because I think at the moment we can acknowledge in some sense that there is a necessity to reconfigure how the profession structures itself and how the systems of education that feed it structure themselves as well. So much is evident in the fact that ARB has felt the sort of compulsion to make this really quite radical kind of shift to the regulatory structures of higher education and architecture. Also, the fact that, you know, we can look at, I think it's fair to acknowledge the fact that we can, look at a Pritzker Prize winning office and the fact that it can expand or contract its workforce by up to a third, effectively seasonally, based on cash flow, isn't a brilliant indictment of the sort of robustness, if you like, of the industry of architecture. And so within that, and I think as a result also of the ARB's kind of recognition of the necessity for some change in the way that it's structured, there's an amazing opportunity too. But I think agency is absolutely central to that because it is to do with acknowledging how, in a way, to intervene within the structure that has unfolded and evolved around us. I think this is where that feeling of territory, in a way, being claimed might kind of emerge from. I think in certain types of projects, obviously it's absolutely correct that now there are 200 people that are required to kind of deliver it, just to get it over the line, because there are an ever-expanding number of incredible specializations that are required to facilitate the construction of something that will last and is ethically kind of equitable and is sustainable, but both ecologically but also financially, and I think also in terms of socially, probably, is a kind of really good way of thinking about longevity and equity as well. I think that's right. But ultimately, architects are systems thinkers, right? As much is also true of the fact that the term architect is claimed and probably more widely recognized as a career opportunity for a coder now than it is, or for someone who works in the development of computer systems than it is for the sort of production of the built environment. So I think there's a real potential in how we educate to try and claim that agency by understanding and figuring out how to sort of restructure the role that the architect plays in relation to the construction of the built environment and society more generally. That's where it may not be about regaining ground lost, but actually about reorienting slightly the system. This is where kind of new modes of practice, I think, are something that is well within our power to do. And education is perhaps a driver of it, but I think one of the things we have talked about quite a lot on the MSci program and the Bartlett is also of the identity of that program as a sort of laboratory for forms of practice that might only come into reality in 5 or 10 or even 15 years. But that's also where the essential tools of the architect, which is to say also recognizing that, you know, quite unsexy words in contemporary discourse about form and composition are actually really important, and they help because they're the ultimate grounding tools and lexicon with which those kind of broader reflections on the nature of our discipline are grounded, ultimately. So it may be that through that lens over time, but through a wider acknowledgement of the system that we're seeking to alter, over time those new models of practice come to fruition by enacting them. Anyway, sorry, long.
Yeah, I fear that we're running out of time. Yeah.
Maybe we should get some questions.
Yeah.
From the.
Does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to ask? Yep.
I'm curious if you guys see this program as benefiting kind of exclusively people who do want to make buildings, or to matriculate into the Masters in Architecture, or if there are other skills that you think that people would learn in this program that would be transferable, and what other things do you think that people might do if they were to complete this program?
It becomes my responsibility to answer somehow. But no, I mean, I would love to hear how other people would think. But I think, as Rory pointed out at the end, that it's not. Although I think the AA transfer tries to envision pulling all these, how do you say, like the urge or the interest from their past experience, and somehow through certain struggle with of their in their shifts, and their answer was to study architecture and become an architect. I think it's quite interesting to then how to host that knowledge and experience through perhaps the form, like a real concrete form, or the building language as a shared medium. But nonetheless, I don't think it facilitates this kind of typical role of an architect. I don't think the AA has ever been the place to kind of produce the status quo architect. So it really, and the ethos of the program is actually the transitionary route into the AA diploma program or the other postgraduate programs, which has a very specific focus in how they want to engage in architecture, right? So therefore, I don't think it will be benefiting anyone who's only interested in like the typical practice of delivering building and learning the skills of how to build, but more on the this kind of laboratory that's been experimenting for a very long time, even through the unit systems, and we've been changing and responding to the shifts that we are facing for every year, because it's a yearly routine to change. But I hope that more or less kind of answers and the ethos behind the program, and try to generate and cultivate new modes of practice and thinking. Yeah.
Is there another question?
The question is not to, I guess, it's trying to just sparkle some idea to kind of make some comparison. I came from a different degree as well, which at the time when I was applying, there's no this program, and then so here we are. But I guess when I was looking into AA, I was mostly very intrigued in the intermediate program, which is good for me now. I'm not wasting my time, but I wonder, how would you compare for people who are making these choices? What is the difference? Like, what would be their experience in terms of learning than in the transfer program, than going directly, maybe going to like a intermediate unit? What would it be like if we played?
I mean, I wish if the questions were for this event, but less about the program. But I can answer to that. No, it's the. I think it's a really good question, and actually that is also very important ethical questions of this grounding of this program, actually, because in a way, if I'm being really transparent about the process of developing the program, it was a real dilemma of almost rejecting my own education, and that I really am fully invested and believing in, because it is really like, how do we kind of ignore the traditional route that I always thought that is the only way, or the quote unquote the right path, and I think it's a really rich experience that I've gone through in 3 years of the intermediate program at the AA, and I'm sure that a lot of my colleagues here would agree with that kind of experience being so invaluable. However, the difference is that I think the time has changed. I think the tendency of having really less applicants every year from this kind of, let's say, the mature thinkers or the advanced thinkers who already had a lot of different experiences and wealth of knowledge that they gain. We don't really have those demographics anymore, and I started to question why. And it has a lot to do with, of course, the time and cost that you may have to invest in just to enter into the program, right? And I don't think many people kind of are no longer really prone to, or have the courage to kind of, start from new. And and the question was, can we really leverage that condition and really believe in the education that they have received and the experience that they had has like a value, and these are the transferable, qualities of knowledge in terms of how they learned and researched in their previous degree, and how they actually explored architecture in their own terms, maybe can be accommodated. And if we don't really see the qualities from those candidates, then they should take the the first year route and studying from the intermediate program, which I really hope that we still exist and and its form and or make it even more interesting and more relevant, let's say, and by finding a way we can survive in ever-shifting forms of education. That's, I think, a lot of higher education providers are struggling actually to, in both ways, in both postgraduate levels and also undergraduate levels. So it's really precarious time for many of the institutions, but at the same time, I think because of the opportunities that's given to everyone, I think it's also time that it can be really interesting and really meaningful. So let's really hope that the transfer program can actually make it really interesting. Yes. So yeah, sorry that it's been delayed a bit, but thank you very much everyone for joining us today. And I think the drinks are available at the back, and let's continue this conversation. Yeah, thank you very much.